Hey everyone, this is Mind Over Men on a lovely Good Friday. I've decided today to talk about some of the recent stories that have come out about the Catholic Church and some of the abuses related to them. The first story was from a Dutch newspaper that reported on the story of Honk Hethuis. I may have gotten that wrong. In the 50s, Honk was unfortunately the victim of sexual abuse. At least two men within the Catholic Church were convicted for abusing him. Nonetheless, he was eventually transferred to a psychiatric institution in the Netherlands in 1956 on orders of the church, and he was diagnosed with having a sexual deviancy, basically being classified as a homosexual deviant. In that year, the remedy at the time, if it can be called that, was castration. Now, in the records, it was said that he requested to be castrated, specifically at his own request. However, there's no documentation of this ever happening. There are no written formal requests to be castrated, and it's hard to believe that Mr. Hethuis, 18 at the time, would request to be castrated. Not only that, I'm not sure how someone can be diagnosed as a sexual deviant when they are, in fact, the victim of sexual abuse. Other things that came out was it was widely suggested that the castration was a form of punishment. This isn't, of course, actually documented. But punishment for speaking out to the police on the abuses of the church, which would go in line with the fact that many of these cases went unreported and were actively covered up. In the Netherlands alone, it's estimated that about 2,000, according to a commission done last year, 2,000 cases of sexual assault were found out. This case in particular actually isn't in that list because it was part of a larger group of, the estimate was about 10,000 cases in which the evidence was not as strong, but nonetheless pointed to an organized cover-up of sexual abuse. The only reason we're finding out the story now, Mr. Hethuis died in 1958, only 2 years after his castration, but a friend of his, Cornelius Roeg, a sculptor, thought it was important to bring the story of his friend to light. He shared private correspondences what he had with him. He apparently saw his castrated body in person. And further research on this story has shown that up to 10 cases, 10 other boys might have faced similar situations and had to undergo castration. Also revealed in the papers coming from the institution, which were most disturbing, was that the clergy seemed to believe that the parents did not need to be involved in a case like this, making it even more heinous and an even more egregious case of abuse. It's a sad story, and there's currently an independent commission going on in the Netherlands to get to the bottom of this. We can only hope that justice is served, and whoever was responsible for transferring Mr. Hethuis will be brought to justice, assuming they are still out there. Probably not that likely because it happened over 50 years ago. But nonetheless, it's great that there's at least a commission looking into it to try and find some answers. But also related to this story, and even less widely reported than a story of boys being castrated who were the victims of abuse, was another story that occurred about 23 years ago. Well, the events happened 23 years ago, this time in Italy. A young man, Teodoro Polverenti, who is 37 right now, but at the time he was 14. And when he was 14, he was assaulted by Don Carlo Chiarenza, his family's priest at the time. Chiarenza is now a Monsignor. But what Mr. Polverenti did, which was so courageous, was that he actually confronted his attacker 24 years later, or 23 years later, excuse me, and he recorded it. And their exchange is chilling. I mean, I'll read it out for you right now.
Look, I actually felt dirty. I want so much to talk about all these things. But why are you worrying? No, I'm not. Honestly, I didn't know what sex was. And then all this happened between us. It was almost as if I lost a second father. I cared for you very much. Don't portray me as a father figure. You had an extraordinary family and you didn't need more. I followed your desire to be loved, without limits. Perhaps you don't remember, but I hardly ever took the initiative. That is, I sense you needed to be held. But it was one time? Yes, a couple of times. I only remember one time. But there was no plan. I felt desire. There was a moment that you appeared to enjoy as well. It even seemed to do you good. It was a way of telling you that I cared for you.
That was just about a small excerpt from the larger conversation, but I believe it shows that Mr. Chiarenza is without remorse. He blames his victim and even goes as far to saying the boy he raped enjoyed it. And he is clearly a disgusting individual, without question. Now, Mr. Chiarenza has not been charged with anything. As far as I know, there's no investigation ongoing this case. The statute of limitations in Italy does not extend to 23 years, which is the gap between his confession and the offense. I'm not really fit to comment on Italian law, something I'm not very familiar with. However, I think it's worth noting that Mr. Chiarenza still has a job with the Catholic Church as a Monsignor. There have been no disciplinary measures that I'm aware of. He hasn't been demoted. He hasn't been fired. He hasn't been excommunicated. He is simply sitting in his position, conducting business as usual. And for an organization which claims to represent a divine moral authority, the law of God, in a sense, I think it's inexcusable that they would allow a man like this to continue to represent them, continue to preach for them, continue to represent their divine law. That's about all I have to say on this, aside from Happy Easter. I hope you can enjoy the long weekend.